If someone had told me, 10 years ago, that Julian Vance would one day be sitting in my apartment, dripping rainwater onto my worn hardwood floors, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but the tight, nervous kind I reserved for things so impossible they bordered on cosmic jokes. Julian Vance was a constellation. I was a backyard astronomer with a cheap, plastic telescope, content to just watch from a distance. My life was a carefully curated library of quiet routines. I worked as a municipal archivist, a keeper of forgotten stories and faded photographs. My days were spent in the hushed, climate-controlled basement of City Hall, surrounded by the scent of old paper and microfilm. My evenings were even quieter. A book, a cup of tea, the low hum of the refrigerator. Solitude wasn't a punishment, it was a fortress I had built brick by silent brick. And then there was Friday. Friday was my one concession to the outside world. One drink at the Rusty Compass, a dim, wood-paneled bar that smelled of stale beer and lemon polish. It was a place where no one knew my name, and I liked it that way. I could sit in a corner booth, nurse a single whiskey, and watch the low-stakes drama of other people's lives unfold. It was my observation deck, my human diorama. He was there. I saw him the moment I walked in. It was like a record scratch in my brain. The low murmur of the bar, the clink of glasses, the sad country song on the jukebox, it all went silent. All I could hear was the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart, a trapped bird beating against my ribs. Julian Vance. He hadn't changed, not really. Taller, broader in the shoulders, but the core of him was the same. The same dark, unruly hair that he was always pushing out of his eyes. The same easy confidence in the way he stood, leaning against the bar as if he owned it. He was laughing, a low rumble that I could feel even from across the room. He was a bonfire in my quiet, little world of paper and dust. In high school, he had been everything I was not. Captain of the soccer team, effortlessly popular, surrounded by a magnetic field of friends and admirers. I was the boy who ate lunch in the library, the one who used big words and flinched when a ball came my way. Our orbits were so different they might as well have been in separate solar systems. My adoration for him was a secret I kept locked away like a rare, fragile document, something too precious and too embarrassing to ever see the light of day. And now he was here. In my bar. My quiet, anonymous corner of the world. I almost turned and left. It was the smart thing to do, the self-preservationist instinct screaming at me to retreat to the safety of my fortress. But my feet felt like they were bolted to the floor. My eyes were fixed on him, a decade of unspoken longing roaring back to life. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping the room. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, I thought our eyes would meet. I ducked my head, staring intently at the scuffed toes of my shoes, my face burning. Just a ghost. I'm just a ghost. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. And went out. A collective groan went through the bar. The darkness was sudden and absolute, punctuated by the faint blue glow of cell phone screens. The jukebox died mid-twang. The hum of the beer coolers ceased. A new sound filled the space, the violent, percussive drumming of rain against the roof. A storm had rolled in, silent and swift. My carefully constructed routine was shattered. The fortress had been breached. The bartender, a burly woman named Marge, shouted over the rising chatter. Looks like that storm finally hit. Power's probably out for the whole block. Everyone stay put, I'll find some candles. Stay put. The words echoed in the sudden, claustrophobic darkness. I was trapped. Trapped in a room with the living, breathing embodiment of a decade of my secret heart. My stomach was a knot of terrified bees. I made my way carefully toward my usual booth in the corner, my hands outstretched like a sleepwalker. I just needed to be still. To be invisible until the lights came back on and I could slip away unnoticed. Someone was already there. I bumped into a solid, unmoving form. Sorry, I mumbled, trying to back away. A familiar voice cut through the dark. No worries. It's a bit of a mess in here. Julian. Of course. It was my booth. My corner. Of course, he would be there. The universe had a cruel, ironic sense of humor. You can sit, he said. His voice was closer now. Plenty of room. My mind screamed no. Run. But my body, the traitor, slid onto the worn leather of the booth opposite him. The table between us was a flimsy shield. The darkness was a suffocating blanket. Marge appeared with a few flickering candles, placing one on our table. The small flame threw our faces into dramatic relief, all sharp angles and deep shadows. His face. I could see it clearly now. And I started to notice the differences. There was a thin, white scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a detail my memory had not supplied. There were fine lines around his eyes, not from laughter, but from something else. Worry. Weariness. His hands, resting on the table, weren't the smooth, athletic hands of a teenager. They were calloused, the knuckles slightly scraped. This was not the golden god of my memory. This was a man. A tired man. He was looking at me, a faint, puzzled frown on his face. Do I know you? My throat went dry. Leo. Leo Garner. We went to Northwood High together. Recognition dawned in his eyes, slow and then all at once. Leo. Wow. Yeah, of course. The library kid, he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his tired eyes. Didn't think I'd see anyone from back then. I'm just passing through. The library kid, the label stung, even after all these years. It was a perfect, concise summary of my entire high school existence. Small, quiet, and filed away on a shelf. I'm an archivist now, I said, the words feeling defensive, inadequate. For the city. An archivist, he repeated, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. So you still hang out with old, dead things, he said it with a teasing grin, but there was no malice in it. It was just an observation. Before I could formulate a response, Marge returned. Good news is the whiskey still pours. Bad news is the credit card machine is dead. Cash only. I reached for my wallet. Empty. I always paid with my card. Always. It was part of the routine. My face must have fallen because Julian noticed. You good? I don't have any cash, I admitted, the confession feeling like a monumental failure. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smirk. He just pulled a crumpled 20 from his pocket and slid it onto the table. I'll get this round, he signaled to Marge. 2 more whiskeys. The gesture threw me off balance. It was simple kindness, but coming from him, it felt like a seismic shift in the tectonic plates of my world. The Julian I knew, or thought I knew, wouldn't have noticed. He certainly wouldn't have offered to pay for the library kid's drink. Marge brought the drinks, the amber liquid glowing in the candlelight. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the drumming of the rain and the nervous chatter from the rest of the bar. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with the unspoken weight of 10 years. So, he said, breaking the quiet. What's it like? Being back. I blinked. I never left. Oh. Right, he looked down at his glass, swirling the contents. I couldn't wait to get out of this town. Felt like a cage. Where did you go? I asked, my curiosity overriding my anxiety. All over. Chicago for a while. Then out west. Construction. Framing houses, mostly, he flexed his calloused hands. Honest work. Hard work. It explained the hands. It explained the weariness in his eyes. The gilded future everyone had predicted for him, college scholarship, professional sports, a life of easy success, hadn't happened. Or if it had taken a detour through rougher country. What brings you back? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He was quiet for a long time. The candle flame danced in his dark eyes. My dad's sick, he said finally, the words low and rough. He's at the county hospital. It's not good. Vulnerability. It radiated from him in waves. The confident, untouchable facade had cracked, and in its place was just a man, worried about his father. The power dynamic, the one that had existed between us for a decade, him on a pedestal, me in the shadows, crumbled into dust. We were just 2 people, trapped in a dark bar on a rainy night. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. The words felt clumsy, hollow, but they were all I had. He just nodded, taking a long swallow of his whiskey. He looked out the window, at the rain-streaked darkness. I feel like I'm drowning here, you know. All these ghosts. All these memories. I knew exactly what he meant. My entire life was built around ghosts and memories. He looked back at me, his gaze intense in the flickering light. You deal with the past for a living. How do you do it? How do you keep it from eating you alive? The question was so direct, so raw, that it knocked the air out of me. He was asking me for help. For insight. Julian Vance was asking the library kid for advice. I don't know, I said honestly. I guess I try to keep it organized. Put it in boxes. Label it. It feels safer when it's contained. He let out a short, humorless laugh. My past doesn't fit in a box. We talked for what felt like hours. He talked about the jobs he'd had, the cities he'd seen. He talked about the loneliness of being on the road. I talked about my work, about the strange satisfaction of piecing together someone's life from a handful of letters and a faded photograph. It was the most I had spoken to another human being in years. The rain began to slow, the drumming on the roof softening to a gentle patter. The candles were burning low. As he was telling a story about a construction job in Arizona, he gestured with his hand, and the back of his fingers brushed against mine on the table. It was nothing. An accident. But for me, it was everything. A jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm, straight to my heart. My entire body went rigid. Heat flooded my face. It was the briefest of touches, lasting less than a second, but it felt like I had been branded. My skin tingled where he had touched me. My mind went completely, utterly blank. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if he'd been burned. Sorry, he said, his voice suddenly thick. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, my eyes wide in the candlelight. The moment stretched, thin and humming with a new kind of tension. The air between us was charged, electric. The casual intimacy of our conversation had vanished, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. He was looking at me, really looking at me, and I saw a flicker of the same confusion and shock in his eyes that I felt in my own chest. The lights came back on. The sudden, harsh fluorescent glare was a physical blow. The bar was instantly loud again, the jukebox kicking back to life. The magic, fragile bubble we had been in popped, leaving us exposed and blinking in the unforgiving light. People started to move, to gather their things, to pay their tabs. The moment was over. Julian cleared his throat, pushing himself back from the table. Well. Guess the storm's over, he sounded like a stranger again. The distance was back, a chasm opening up between us once more. Yeah, I managed to say, my voice a croak. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. Thanks for the company, Leo. It was good to see you. He was going to leave. He was going to walk out that door, and I would be left alone in my corner, the ghost of his touch still burning on my skin. The thought was unbearable. My car won't start, he said, looking out the window into the drenched parking lot. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. Of course. The battery must be dead. My heart did a wild, hopeful leap. I can give you a ride, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. If you want. I don't live far from here. He looked at me, surprised. Then a slow, tired smile touched his lips. Yeah. That would be great, man. Thank you. The walk to my car was a blur of wet pavement and streetlights reflecting in puddles. We didn't speak. The easy conversation we'd shared in the dark had vanished. Now, there was only this tense, humming awareness of each other. The space between us felt both too wide and too narrow. My apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building that had once been a watch factory. It was small, but it was mine. The walls were lined with bookshelves, the furniture was old and comfortable. It was my sanctuary, a physical extension of my own quiet, ordered mind. Bringing him here felt like letting him read a page from my secret diary. This is it, I said, unlocking the door. He stepped inside, dwarfing the small entryway. He looked around, his eyes taking in the stacks of books, the framed historical maps on the walls. It's quiet, he said. It's my specialty, I replied, trying for a joke. He was still standing by the door, dripping onto the welcome mat, looking uncertain. The confident man from the bar was gone. In his place was someone who looked lost. "You can, stay here for the night," I offered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "On the couch. It's late, and the rain's starting up again. You can call a tow truck in the morning." It was a crazy, reckless thing to say. I never had people over. Never. My home was my shell. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "It's fine," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "The couch is comfortable enough." He finally nodded, a look of profound relief on his face. "Thanks, Leo." "Really?" I got him a change of clothes, an old sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants that were definitely too short for him, and a towel. While he was in the bathroom, I stood in the middle of my living room, my hands shaking. What was I doing? This was Julian Vance. In my apartment. Wearing my clothes. The reality of it was too much for my carefully ordered brain to process. He came out of the bathroom, his dark hair damp, the gray sweatshirt clinging to his broad shoulders. He looked younger without the weight of his wet jacket, more like the boy I remembered, and yet completely different. "Thanks," he said again, holding up the clothes. "This is a lifesaver." We stood there, in the dim light of my living room, the world outside muted by the sound of rain against the windows. The apartment felt charged, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. "Why were you so quiet in high school?" he asked suddenly. The question hung in the air between us. I shrugged, looking away. I had nothing to say. "I don't believe that," he said, his voice low. He took a step closer. "I remember you. In English class. You always knew the answers. You just never raised your hand." He remembered. He remembered a specific detail about me from a class we took a decade ago. The thought was staggering. "And I remember seeing you at the library," he continued, taking another step. We were only a few feet apart now. "You always had this look on your face. Like you were a million miles away." I whispered. "Where did you go?" "Places in books. Safer places." He was so close now I could feel the warmth radiating from him. I could smell the clean scent of my soap on his skin. My heart was a drum solo in the quiet room. "I used to watch you," I confessed, the words spilling out of me, a torrent I couldn't stop. "At soccer practice. You were like you were on fire." So alive, the admission felt like tearing open my own chest and showing him the frantic, fluttering thing inside. His eyes widened, and a deep, shuddering breath escaped his lips. "Leo," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And then he closed the small distance between us. He didn't grab me. He didn't crush his lips to mine. It was slower than that, more hesitant. He raised a hand, his calloused fingers gently cupping my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver down my spine. His eyes searched mine, asking a question I was too terrified to answer. "This is happening." The thought was a distant, static-filled radio signal. "This is real." He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, held captive by the impossible reality of the moment. His lips touched mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion or frantic desire. It was a kiss of discovery. It was soft, questioning, unbelievably gentle. It tasted of whiskey and rain and 10 years of unspoken longing. It was the most honest thing I had ever experienced. My entire world, the one I had so carefully constructed and maintained, dissolved into that single, staggering point of contact. I brought my hands up to his chest, my fingers curling into the soft fabric of the sweatshirt. I could feel the steady, heavy beat of his heart under my palm, a rhythm that seemed to answer the frantic pace of my own. He deepened the kiss slightly, a soft sigh escaping him. It was a sound of surrender. A sound of relief. It was the sound of a man who had been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time and had finally set it down. When he pulled away, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "I remember you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I always remembered you. The confession undid me. It was the key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. The fortress walls didn't just crumble, they evaporated into thin air. I woke to the gray light of morning filtering through my blinds. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind still thick with sleep. Then it all came rushing back. The bar. The storm. Julian. I turned my head. The other side of the bed was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the last vestiges of sleep. I sat bolt upright, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. The couch in the living room was also empty, the blanket I had given him folded neatly at one end. He was gone. The silence of the apartment was different now. It wasn't the comfortable, familiar silence of my solitude. It was a hollow, aching silence. It was an absence. A void where he had been. My mind, my cruel, analytical mind, immediately started constructing a narrative. It was a mistake. A drunken, rain-soaked moment of weakness. He was lonely and sad about his father, and I was just there. A convenient port in a storm. The morning light had brought clarity, and with it, shame and regret. He had fled, unable to even face me. Each thought was a fresh turn of the knife. The library kid. He felt sorry for the library kid. The memory of the kiss, which had felt so real, so profound, now seemed like a cruel joke. My face burned with humiliation. I had let him in. I had let him see the soft, vulnerable underbelly of my carefully guarded life, and he had run. I stumbled out of bed, my legs unsteady. On the kitchen counter, next to my coffee maker, was a piece of paper torn from my own notepad. My breath caught in my throat. His handwriting was a messy, slanted scrawl. Had to go. Dad. I'll call you. And below that, his phone number. The note was a lifeline, but my anxiety-riddled brain immediately began to pick it apart. Had to go. So abrupt. Dad. Was that the truth, or just an easy excuse? I'll call you. The vaguest, most noncommittal promise in the human language. It meant nothing. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. I paced my small apartment, a caged animal. I stared at my phone, willing it to ring, then hating myself for the pathetic desperation of it. I replayed every moment of the previous night, analyzing every word, every look, every touch, searching for clues I might have missed. Had I misread everything? Was I just a fool, projecting a decade of longing onto a simple act of kindness? The fortress was in ruins, and I felt exposed, raw, shivering in the wreckage. My solitude, once a source of comfort, was now a torment. The quiet of my apartment amplified the screaming silence of my phone. A day passed. Then another. No call. The hope, that fragile, flickering thing, died. It was replaced by a dull, heavy certainty. I was right. It was a mistake. He was gone, back to his real life, and I was just an embarrassing footnote in his brief, sad trip home. I had been a fool to think it could be anything more. I was, and always would be, the library kid. Safe behind my walls of paper and silence. On the third day, I forced myself back into my routine. I went to work. I descended into the quiet, cool basement of City Hall. I pulled files. I answered research queries. I tried to lose myself in the lives of the dead, but their stories offered no comfort. My own story, the one that had almost started, felt more tragic than any I found in the archives. That evening, as I was locking up my office, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't look. I couldn't bear the disappointment if it was just a spam call. But my hand moved of its own accord, pulling the device from my pocket. An unknown number. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello. Leo. His voice. It was rough, exhausted, but it was unmistakably his. The world tilted on its axis. Julian, I breathed, my knees feeling weak. I leaned against a filing cabinet for support. Hey. I'm so sorry. I know I said I'd call. It's been a mess here, he sounded wrecked. My dad, he took a turn for the worse the other morning. I had to get to the hospital right away. I haven't left. The truth. It had been the truth. The relief was so immense it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't about me. Is he okay? I asked, my own anxieties momentarily forgotten. He's holding on, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. But it's bad, Leo. It's really bad. He paused, and I could hear the sterile, distant beeping of hospital machinery in the background. Listen, the reason I'm calling. I know this is insane, and you have every right to say no, but I could really use a friend right now. I can't do this alone. The vulnerability in his voice was a physical thing. It reached through the phone and wrapped around my heart. The strong, confident man was gone. This was just a son, terrified of losing his father. Where are you? I asked, my voice steady and clear. I'll be right there. The hospital waiting room was a sterile purgatory of beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. Julian was huddled in a corner, his face buried in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were rumpled, his hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under his eyes. I walked over and sat down next to him, not saying a word. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. When he saw me, a look of such profound relief washed over his face that it made my chest ache. You came, he whispered. I said I would, I replied softly. He didn't try to explain the silence. He didn't have to. I understood. We sat there for hours, in a comfortable silence that was the complete opposite of the anxious, hollow silence that had filled my apartment. I bought us coffee from a vending machine. He told me stories about his dad, about fishing trips and learning to drive. I just listened. I was an anchor in his storm. Late that night, a doctor came out to speak with him. The news was not good. His father didn't have much time left. Julian listened, his face a stoic mask, but I saw the way his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists. When the doctor left, he finally broke. He didn't sob or cry out. He just seemed to fold in on himself, a silent, shuddering collapse. I put my arm around his shoulders, a simple, solid point of contact. He leaned into me, resting his head on my shoulder, and for the first time, I was the strong one. He stayed with me for the next week. We spent our days at the hospital, our nights in my quiet apartment. We talked. We really talked. He told me about his fears, his regrets, the crushing weight of expectation that had followed him his whole life. He admitted that his confident exterior was a carefully constructed suit of armor, and he was exhausted from wearing it. I told him about my loneliness, about the fortress of solitude I had built to protect myself from a world that had always felt too loud, too fast, too overwhelming. I told him how my fear of getting hurt had kept me from truly living. In the crucible of grief and exhaustion, we stripped away the layers of who we thought we were, and showed each other the raw, frightened, hopeful people underneath. The night after the funeral, we were sitting on my couch, the apartment dark except for a single lamp. The silence was heavy with grief, but also with a new, fragile intimacy. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, looking at me, his eyes clear and direct. For how I left that morning. I panicked. What happened between us, it was real. And it scared the hell out of me. It scared me too, I admitted. I'm not good at this stuff, Leo, he said, his voice low. Feelings. Talking. I've spent my whole life just pushing through. Being the strong one. I don't know how to be anything else. You don't have to be strong with me, I said. You can just be. He looked at me for a long moment, 1,000 emotions flickering in his eyes. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, worn key. It was the key to his father's house, the house he had just inherited. I'm staying, he said, his voice thick. I'm not running anymore. There are a lot of ghosts here, but I don't want to face them alone. He held the key out to me. I was wondering if maybe you'd help me. It wasn't a key to a house. It was a key to a future. It was a promise. A tangible, solid gesture that said, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. My hand was shaking as I took it from him. Our fingers brushed, and this time, the jolt was not one of shock, but of recognition. Of coming home. Yes, I whispered. "I'll help you." The days that followed were a blur of cardboard boxes and memories. We sorted through his father's life, through old photographs and dusty trinkets. Each object told a story. It was like the work I did in the archives, but this was a living history, and I was part of it. We worked side by side, a team. Slowly, we began to build something new in the shell of the old. We painted walls. We fixed a leaky faucet. We made the quiet, grief-filled house a home. Our home. The new beginning wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. It was a collection of small, quiet intimacies. It was waking up in the morning and seeing him there, asleep beside me, his face soft and unguarded in the dawn light, the crushing weight of anxiety replaced by a profound sense of peace. It was the comfortable silence of making coffee together in the kitchen, our movements a practiced, easy dance. Him reaching for the mugs, me grinding the beans. No words needed. It was sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the sunset, his arms slung casually around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart. I looked at him one evening, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp as he read a book, and I thought about the boy I used to watch from a distance. The untouchable constellation. And I looked at the men beside me, with his calloused hands and the weary lines around his eyes, a man who knew grief and loneliness, a man who had seen my fortress and hadn't run away, but had instead offered me a key. My life had been a carefully organized archive, a collection of quiet, predictable stories. Julian Vance was the unexpected file, the unlabeled box, the disruption that had threatened to upend my entire system. But he hadn't destroyed my world. He had expanded it. He hadn't broken down my walls, he had shown me the door was unlocked the whole time. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that turned my quiet little story into an epic. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait to see what happened on the next page.